Wow, I was told I was going to have to spend a minute getting you all to pay attention. This is great. Good morning, I'm Debbie Isaacson. I'm MPP class of 2000. It's great to see you all here this morning. I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Degree Programs and Student Affairs, and I hear that this is a record-breaking reunion, so congratulations to us all for making it an amazing weekend. It's my distinct privilege this morning to introduce to all of you Jake Sullivan, a leader whose work sits at the intersection of diplomacy, national security, and global strategy. Over the course of his impressive career, he has served in numerous roles in public service, including as Director of Policy Planning at the State Department, National Security Advisor to Vice President Joe Biden, and Deputy Chief of Staff to Secretary Hillary Clinton. From January 2021 to January 2025, he served as President Joe Biden's National Security Advisor, where he played a pivotal role in shaping U.S. foreign policy, addressing major global challenges such as the Russian-Ukraine war and the Hamas-Israel war. He coordinated international efforts to support Ukraine and helped maintain and strengthen NATO and other key alliances. He was deeply involved in efforts to normalize relations between Israel and Arab states, and he worked to address key aspects of US-China relations, including trade and technology issues. Often when I'm asked to introduce someone, I do a little bit of digging to see if I can find some off-book information, share a piece of information that doesn't appear directly in their bio. So to prepare for today's, what I did is what many of us do. I leveraged the HKS network. Here's what I learned. Despite the positions of authority and responsibility he's held, he's widely viewed as embodying the best version of Minnesota nice. According to one person, he's unfailingly polite and courteous, even under the most stressful of circumstances. And though he demands excellence from his staff, he's known as nurturing and a supportive boss. One illustration of this during his time leading the National Security Council is that each week he handed out one or more signed game balls to his junior staff members, writing the entire NSC staff prior to that each week to detail the winner's exceptional actions to advance the US national interest. I think it takes a remarkable human being to maintain that balance of humanity and empathy, as Prime Minister Ardern reminded us all on Friday, while engaged in incredibly challenging work. And we at HKS are so very lucky that Jake Sullivan joined us just last month as the school's inaugural Kissinger Professor of the Practice of Statecraft and World Order. Having him here will give future generations of students the opportunity to learn from both his experience and his expertise. This afternoon, Jake will be joined by Erica Chenoweth, who is Academic Dean for Faculty Development and the Frank Stanton Professor of the First Amendment here at the Kennedy School. Professor Chenoweth's research focuses on political violence and its alternatives, and they direct the Nonviolent Action Lab, an innovation hub that uses social science tools and evidence to support movement-led political transformation. Among the many hats that Erica wears, they serve as the faculty dean of Fortzheimer House at Harvard College, regularly enriching the lives of Harvard College students there, including delivering annually a full lecture on the art of maple sugaring, complete with a sampling of various syrups created using sap from their very own maple trees. The skills and talents of our faculty truly are extraordinary, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you both Jake and Erica. Erica, thank
you. Thank you so much, Debbie. And let me add my own welcome to all of you back home to Harvard Kennedy School. It is such a delight to see so many people from all over the place coming back to spend a weekend together in community here. And I'll reiterate Debbie's warm welcome to our new colleague, Jake Sullivan, joined us last month, and really excited to be able to dive in with you. So speaking of Minnesota nice, maybe you can start us off by telling us how you wound up starting your life in Minnesota and becoming the National Security Advisor under President Biden.
So I was told I had 90 minutes to answer this question, so I hope everybody can get a full extended laydown of my life story. First of all, it's wonderful to be here, and I'm really proud to be one of the newest members of this community. And one of the reasons I'm really proud of that is because the minute you walk in here and you start engaging the students or the faculty or the staff or the alumni, there's a kind of spirit and ethos here that's just incredibly generative. And it's, 4 years as National Security Advisor takes a lot out of you, depletes you, and the reservoir, I feel already, of just intellectual engagement, basic humanity is being replenished, in just my first few weeks here. So it's really been a thrill to be a part of this story. So I grew up one of 5 kids, the public school system in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And in the 1980s, this is the era of Red Dawn and Rocky IV. It's the late Cold War. And I grew up thinking about the United States in the world as a force for good, standing up against, these dark forces of oppression and aggression. And we had a globe on our kitchen table. And when I was a kid, we would all just sort of point at countries and talk about the world. And my parents really encouraged that among us. And I went off to college, to a college down the road in Connecticut, and thinking I was going to do international relations, and I majored in that. Then I did a master's degree in IR at Oxford, then came back to Yale Law School. While I was at Yale Law School, I had a shift in thinking about where I could actually apply my skills in terms of a career in public service, and it was back home in the community in Minnesota. And I moved home after clerking, thinking I'd be there for the long term. And after a year of being an associate at a law firm in Minneapolis, I got a call from Amy Klobuchar, who'd just been elected to the Senate, asking me to come out to DC for 4 months at the end of 2006, beginning of 2007. I kept my office. I took a leave of absence from the law firm, and as far as I know, my stuff is still in that office. Because I ended up in DC, then taking opportunities that lay before me and returning to kind of my first love of IR and foreign policy. But I've never entirely given up on the notion that a model of public service also involves being rooted in a community. And even as I've tried to boil the ocean, grappling with the whole world. And so as I look ahead, one of the things that I really care about, both in scholarship but also in kind of any future service, is how to make sure we're rooting what we think about in the way of U.S. foreign policy or statecraft in the lived experience of people, around their kitchen tables, what's going to make their lives better, safer, and easier. And that's been very much animating for me in my time in government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe that's a good segue into maybe a deeper discussion into the contribution you made to understanding the foreign policy for the middle class, which is kind of one of your signature intellectual contributions, we might say, to American foreign policy over the last few years. So can you describe a bit more about what foreign policy for the middle class means and how it changed the priorities of the National Security Council as you chaired it?
One of the things that I was really struck by during my time in the Obama administration was Democrats and Republicans had very different views about domestic economic policy, whether it was taxation or the social safety net or regulation or you name it, like really big debates that have played out over the course of decades. And, people are on both sides of those debates, but clearly you could define and identify the distinctions. But somehow in international economic policy, there was really very little distinction, if any, between Democrats and Republicans. So the major international economic initiative of the Obama administration, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, was actually a Bush-era initiative that Obama carried forward. And it kind of struck me that was odd, that in a way we had hermetically sealed international economic policy as this thing kind of defined by a set of assumptions and practices that weren't really being contested or debated in a serious way. And so in my years out of government in the first Trump administration, I put a lot of time into thinking about how do you center, yes, international economic policy, but then the overall national security strategy of the United States in, as I was saying before, the lived experience of working people in this country and what's going to deliver for them. And particularly after COVID, it became clear that things we didn't really think about in the national security community at all, like supply chains, right? No one was talking about supply chains in 2019, were all of a sudden becoming hugely relevant to people's ability to, say, afford a car, let alone to the question of getting life-saving medical supplies that were in short supply in 2020 because we were living in a just-in-time world. So that was pretty revelatory to me. How do you create an industrial and innovation base at home that generates solid, inclusive growth and also contributes to our national security? How do you create diverse, resilient supply chains so we're not dependent on any one country or one source for critical goods at a time of crisis? How do you create the kind of mobilization of investment required to solve huge challenges, whether it's infrastructure or the clean energy transition or taking on the climate crisis? These are all things that really fundamentally matter to the basic health, well-being, and prosperity of people here. And for me, making that central to the work of National Security Advisor was something I carried with me every day over my time, and continue to believe that that's a critical, a vital ingredient for U.S. foreign policy. And we didn't get everything right. And in fact, many of you are probably familiar with this book, Abundance, by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. I read that book and almost felt like it was an encapsulation of my frustration in the job, that we had a theory of bold investment, but the practice of implementing that, of building at speed and scale, man, it was hard. And one of the things that I want to really sink my teeth into is, because that book is a good diagnosis book, you get to the prescription part, which I quickly tried to get to, and it's sort of, good luck with all that, So, okay, good luck. So I would like to, try to dive into that.
Very good. So during your time in the Biden administration, one of the big portfolio items that I think took up a lot of your time was the relationship between the U.S. and China. Oh. Can you talk a little bit about what you saw, some of the key successes and what you learned from those and managing that relationship?
Yeah. So, look, when we came into office, the basic line in Beijing put forward by their top leader was, the West is declining and the East is rising. Basically, America is in secular decline. Our best days are behind us. The fulcrum is shifting to Asia, and within Asia, the fulcrum is shifting to China. China's an unstoppable juggernaut, and everybody should basically, get off the U.S. train and get on the China train. That was kind of the mindset as we came in. I viewed our responsibility in stewarding this most consequential relationship in the world as rooted in two simple premises. One, the U.S. and China are two big, ambitious countries with different value systems, different government systems, and so we are going to compete with one another on a whole bunch of different dimensions. And we should lean into that competition to do so as effectively as we possibly can. Second, the U.S. and China are going to be around. Neither of us is going anywhere. And so we have to learn to live alongside one another as major powers in the world. So how do you compete intensively, effectively on the one hand, but manage that competition so that it doesn't tip over into conflict or confrontation? And also, how do you leave enough space to be able to work together on issues that demand that the U.S. and China work together, whether it's on climate or fentanyl or nuclear proliferation, or something we didn't work together at all on, but to great consequence for the world, public health, COVID-19. So that's a mouthful. It's not a bumper sticker. But competing intensively, but managing that competition so it doesn't tip over into conflict, leaving room for cooperation, that requires a whole of government, every tool, leveraging the private sector, the nonprofit sector, universities. It's a whole of society effort to try to make that work. And it's very easy to tip too far one way or the other, but I would say over our 4 years, we competed effectively and put the United States in a very strong competition, technologically, diplomatically, economically. We also managed the competition so that even when there were crises, like when the balloon floated over the US for 5 days and it felt like 5 years sitting in my office, we were ultimately able to work through that. And a big part of the reason we were able to work through that is because intense competition requires intense diplomacy. And President Biden and President Xi charged me and China's foreign minister, Wang Yi, with the responsibility of meeting for a couple days at a time in cities around the world, from Vienna to Bangkok, to work through the very challenging issues confronting our relationship. Not to reach agreement on everything, but to reduce misperception, reduce surprise, increase the potential for us to be able to work together on things. And I really count that diplomatic channel as one of the things I'm most proud of in my time, because I really do believe it contributed to a stable relationship at the same time that we weren't holding back in competing vigorously where we felt we had to stand up for our interests or push back against things that China was doing that we didn't like. So that, now we're seeing a bit of a different approach when it comes to China, and we'll see where it goes. But the fundamental ingredients, I think, remain those pieces that I've just laid out.
Mm-hmm. So Russia invaded Ukraine while you were serving.
True.
And this was something that happened, after the United States had correctly warned our allies that it was going to happen. There was a leak of the advanced intelligence suggesting it was going to happen, and as a way to maybe deter it or delay it. But it happened anyway. Where were you when you learned that Russia had invaded Ukraine, and what was it like?
So I was sitting in my office in the West Wing, and I got a secure call from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, and he said, planes are in the air. There's this many of them, time on target for launching a set of missiles, which was the precursor to the tanks rolling, was, basically 75 minutes or some short, I can't remember the exact amount of time, but some short amount of time. So it's underway. Now, this obviously was not a great surprise to us. We knew not just that it was going to happen, but basically the rough time frame it was going to happen. So we had a playbook, like literal hour-by-hour playbook. President calls Zelensky that night. I call my counterpart. We have a meeting the next morning with the G7, with NATO allies. We immediately launch sanctions. The president goes out and speaks. So we, at that point, got to do something that is very rare in a crisis situation. Have kind of the whole response of the next several days gamed out, almost like a reunion program of events and activities, No, but seriously, it was like, and then to execute that. Now, I would just say two striking things about this period. One, and I've said this before, but it just gives you a sense of our psychology in this period. We knew basically from sometime in October that this invasion was coming sometime in January or February, and as the date got closer, that timeline got refined. That's a lot of time where your intelligence community is basically telling you, A, it's going to happen, and B, you can't really deter it. We tried a whole range of different things to deter it, but essentially Putin was hell-bent on doing this, and the only possible way to deter him may have been to actually go in with U.S. forces directly on the ground, confront him and fight, and President Biden did not believe that that was a wise or responsible thing to do. So there you are, and I don't know how many of you guys have seen the movie Austin Powers, but it's a good reference for high-stakes geopolitical decision-making. There's a scene in Austin Powers where you see this steamroller coming towards Austin Powers, and he's standing there and he's like, no! And then they zoom out and the steamroller is like 200 yards away and moving very slowly. And he's just standing there like, no. It felt like that for like 3 months and that's a big part of the reason that we did not want to be disempowered, just kind of waiting. And so the execution of the strategy to declassify intelligence was really about robbing Russia of the element of surprise and denying Russia the ability to say, hey, actually Ukraine started it, to have a pretext, like we had to do it. And it also gave us time to organize and galvanize the allies. And this brings me to the second point. We spent a lot of time negotiating within our own government and then also with the Europeans over what the scope of the economic and financial sanctions would be. And there was a lot of pushback about going too far because of impacts on the global economy, on the US economy, and so forth. And I remember saying to a senior European, this is all going to feel very different once the tanks roll. Just the psychology is going to change. So we're fighting over this bank be on the list, that bank be on the list, that kind of thing. The tanks roll within 48 hours. Mario Draghi and other key, very respected European leaders are in a room together saying, let's seize all the Russian sovereign assets, which had not been on the list right before. Why? Because psychology is a funny thing. Even though you know there's going to be an invasion, even though you can game it out, the act of it just creates a totally different context. And in this case, that happened. And so our well-designed playbook was not something that we just stuck to. We adapted based on how Ukraine reacted, how the international outrage lifted the scope of what was possible from our perspective in things like sanctions or other aspects of the response. And then finally, we were totally right on the intel that they were going to invade. Where the intelligence analysis was not correct was we thought they would take Kyiv in a week. Well, it's May of 2025. Kyiv stands. It's a free and independent city. And that is because of the Ukrainians, because of their bravery and their incredible resourcefulness in that period. But it also meant that what we were planning for in terms of what would unfold over the course of February, March, April was different from the battlefield reality, and that also required a substantial fine-tuning of our approach. And it's a good reminder that you can have deep penetrating insight into certain aspects of a conflict and really have total wild cards and curveballs thrown at you because there's a severe limit on how much you can predict in these, what kind of course these will take once they begin.
Mm-hmm. So I guess one of the things that might have been predicted is the degree to which Russia would seek out more cooperation with China and other players to try to make up for what it was losing under sanctions and things like that. Maybe less predictable was the North Korea connection and the ways that the kind of global alliance patterns are shifting in general these days. What do you make of that initial strategy for trying to really kind of punish Russia and deprive it of assets needed to win compared to where we are today in May 2025?
Look, I think the single biggest shortcoming of our sanctions regime, which was a conscious policy decision taken, and this is, as you guys all know, having spent time here at the Kennedy School, policy is fundamentally about trade-offs, and there are no harder trade-offs than the ones that have to get made by a president, because those are the ones that have kind of gone up to the most senior level. So the question he faced was, in 2022, do we sanction Russia's oil, which is a massive part of their GDP and a massive part of their budget? And the president asked for an analysis. Okay, what happens if we take 2, 3, 4, 5 million barrels of Russian oil off the market? What does that do to the price of oil per barrel? And what does that do, going back to foreign policy for the middle class, to your average working family in terms of their energy costs at the pump? For a policy to be sustainable, for the United States to be able to continue to supply resources, weapons, hold on sanctions, et cetera, it needs the informed consent of the American people. And I actually believe the American people have hung in there on Ukraine much more than a lot of the political commentary has suggested. But the president made the judgment that asking the American people to pay an extra $1, $2 a gallon for gas was a fast way for this whole thing to crater. So this was a trade-off. But we then pursued a whole series of other strategies involving price caps and so forth. Now, in 2022 and 2023, when we were making and revisiting that decision, and the president each time was saying, no, I'm not going to do it, the price environment and the supply environment for oil was very different than it is today in May of 2025. So right now, oil's in the 60s, and you've actually seen President Trump publicly threaten, hey, if Putin doesn't do a ceasefire, maybe I'll go after the oil in a much bigger way. We went at the oil for the first time late in our term as the price was coming down and the environment got better. But to me, the single biggest move the United States could make right now to improve Ukraine's position at the negotiating table and to create new and harder realities for Putin, trade-offs he has to contend with, would be to impose those sanctions. And I hope that happens, because I think absent some increased pressure on Russia right now, I think Putin will think, well, I'll just keep going with this war indefinitely, keep trying to chip away at territory, keep trying to terrorize Ukrainian cities. So fundamentally, we need a piece of leverage, and that leverage is sitting there with the moment right for it to be seized. And the president has even acknowledged that. I hope now he follows through and does it.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of the sort of domestic politics of foreign policy, one of the most notable developments over the last couple of years has been the sort of sharp domestic differences that have been laid bare by the Hamas attack and Israel's response to it. And from where you sat, I'm sure you had a lot of things on your plate with regard to managing the U.S. relationship in the Middle East throughout this whole time. And I'm curious if you can speak to the way that the differences that were emerging in the United States in terms of the domestic politics around the conflict affected how you were thinking about our response.
Yeah, so first, politics, small p politics, is a part of policymaking, whatever it is, even national security policymaking. And a president of the United States has to think about, okay, how is this going to impact, not necessarily my poll numbers as president, but he, or hopefully she, one day, has to say, am I bringing the public along with me on this policy, whatever the policy may be? So it's there. Now, in the Situation Room, we don't sit there and say, well, this number of people think this and that number of people think that, or this interest group thinks this. That's actually kind of not, it's pushed out of the conversation to focus on the policy trade-offs, but it's there, And especially on an issue so tragic, so emotional, so deeply felt by different communities in the United States, it's impossible to wake up as National Security Advisor and go to work and just tune that out. In fact, the opposite. You've got to engage it. And I spent time from October 7th till I left meeting with groups on both sides of this issue. And we were in the unenviable position of having a lot of people on one side saying, you're not standing with Israel strong enough. You should be doing more to support them. And people on the other side saying, you are, allowing this military campaign that's causing so much civilian harm to go on. And we had to take all of that on board and be open to it and hear it and then try to filter through not, well, what are the polls saying about this, or what's the political ramifications of X policy or Y policy, but rather in hearing from those different perspectives, searching should we be doing something different on account of what they are telling us? So I think we tried very hard not to, even in the midst of a highly politically charged environment, and even in the midst of an election, 2024, an election year, I think we tried very hard in serving up recommendations to the president, and the president tried really hard in making decisions not to have them be affected by a core political calculus, but rather just to be aware of the fact of this reality and not be blind to it. Allow it to be, something that we contended with without it making him decide, we're going to do X on the supplemental or Y in terms of arms shipments and so forth. he really did, I think, try to stay true to the basic principle of what's the right policy in this impossibly tragic and difficult situation.
I want to talk a little bit about our beloved and late colleague, Joe Nye. He passed away earlier this month, and one of the things he's known for, although I'll say the way I was introduced to Joe Nye was through his work on complex interdependence, which is less known maybe in the sort of public domain. But one of the things he was known for is his concept of soft power. And I want to hear your reflections a little bit about where soft power showed up in your work, if at all, where it might have played a significant role, or whether you think at this stage it's shrunk, as some people have argued, in terms of the U.S.'s ability to wield it or its influence in the world.
Yeah, so first, just a story about Joe Nye. He was a hero of mine. I didn't get the chance to study with him, but I devoured all his stuff. And one day after I graduated from college, I was on a plane and I ended up sitting next to Joe Nye. And I was like, oh my God. And he must have been thinking, I just want to get from point A to point B and not have some kid like badgering me the whole time. But of course, he's such a thoroughly decent person, as many of you know. He was extremely generous. So I started asking him questions, and I asked him if, just basically what advice did he have for me. And he was very interesting. He's like, listen, everybody will tell you that life is short. And it can be really short. Like, you have to live each day as though it could be your last. But you also have to be prepared that life could be long. Like, you'll have many decades to do things, okay? And in 20, 30 years, one thing I guarantee is you're not going to look back and say, man, I wish I had just gone right into my first job much faster than I did as a 20-something. He said, think about this time as a time to explore, to grow, to take risks, because this is your time to do that. And there's time to, then get on the ladder or whatever it is that you choose to do. And I remember it so well. I did not follow that advice at all. I mean, I did a little, but not. But the reason I remember it so well is, 15, 20 years later, I was like, damn, Joe Nye was right. Why didn't I take 5 more years in my 20s to, do all kinds of different things in different places? So, but it's just, it was characteristic of somebody who's, had such an impact on so many people way beyond this institution and way beyond just his writings. There was something about his being, I think, that just, spread a certain kind of joy and intellectual curiosity and energy that will live long beyond him, and it's awesome. I guess one way of me answering the question is actually looking at this moment we're in right now. Because soft power is A, sometimes difficult to identify and measure, but B, something so there, present, like the air, that you don't even notice it. And that's been true for the United States for a very long time. We've been able to count on a certain degree of soft power over decades, over Democratic and Republican administrations, based on people's view that the United States is, a positive actor that makes lots of mistakes and the like. What's striking about the last few weeks or months is, I would say more than anything, Beijing is looking at this moment and saying, now this is our soft power moment. Mm-hmm. We can go to Europe and Japan and Korea and Australia and India and the global south and others and say, hey, we're the responsible actor. We're the problem solver. We're the one that can come help deal with your things. And they're really doing that actively, massively actively. The Chinese foreign minister met with his Japanese and Korean counterparts, and it was just all about, basically, the split screen with the United States. So do I believe there is still a substantial role for soft power in great power competition and in the need to galvanize solutions to transnational problems? Absolutely. And I worry about decisions that are getting taken now by this administration that go at the heart of that, many of the core elements of both America's appeal and America's advantage. One of them that this school embodies is, Lee Kuan Yew said, China can call on the talents of 1 billion people, America can call on the talents of 7 billion people. And it's because this is a place, this literal place here, the Kennedy School, but this country that has welcomed the best and brightest innovators, entrepreneurs, researchers. And to the extent that starts getting called into question, talk about a blow to soft power. That also converts to a blow to hard power over time, I would add. But I think this is actually his concept is so highly relevant to this moment right now. And it's playing out in real time in ways that I think are a source of some deep concern. But I think it'd be worth all of us going back and looking at how he identified, how he spelled this out, because its application in 2025, I think, is as relevant as the day he wrote it.
So you're the Kissinger Professor, which is named after another Harvard professor who also was a national security advisor. I'm not going to ask you to reflect on whose job was harder.
Mine.
Yeah. I didn't even have to ask. But I do want you to reflect a little bit on why that's the case. What is it that has evolved about the role that makes it one of the most challenging jobs there is right now? And then I'll do a quick follow-up. Well, I'll just tell you what it is now. What do folks who aspire to that role need to know and need to do to prepare?
Yeah. So every national security advisor likes to say that their time in the seat was the most challenging and complex and difficult. It just happens that in my case, it's actually true.
Right.
No. So Henry Kissinger goes off the grid for weeks at a time. National security advisor just disappears to go to Beijing to pave the way for the opening of relations with China. That is beyond impossible to contemplate today. The ability to have time, insulation from public scrutiny, and the flexibility to make a move like that has been so pressurized and compressed by the combination of politics, technology, and the expectation of, every move anybody makes in government is kind of publicly laid out. And so that's one big way in which the job is very different today than it was before. A second big way is, if I think about my day as National Security Advisor, yes, it involved war and crisis, very much so. We were really contending with that. But it also involved what I was talking about before, supply chains. Semiconductor export controls, where I could sit here and speak chapter and verse about the difference between the H100 and the H800, because that's highly relevant to the efficacy of the policy. How you think about the build-out of clean energy technology transmission in the United States so that you can power data centers, so that you can train large language models that can then be converted for intelligence and military purposes as well as civilian purposes. These kinds of things, I think, across technology, across the intersection of economics and national security, have become so much more complex and also so much more central to the role of National Security Advisor than they were before. And so, my advice to people thinking about a career in national security or to become National Security Advisor is to be incredibly heterodox, because that's today. I mean, who knows even where we will be in 25 years from now. But to me, it is moving in a direction where there is there's a demand for a polymathic quality to this role, which sits at the intersection of all these things, when no person can be the kind of polymath that can do it all. And so you also have to build a structure that can support you in all of that. We call it the National Security Council. It may not exist very soon, the way things are going. The other thing that is very interesting about the current moment is there's the person who occupies the job of National Security Advisor also occupies the job of Secretary of State. And I can promise you that I never one day thought when I was National Security Advisor, man, I've got enough time left over to go be Secretary of State too. So maybe I was doing something wrong in the job, but that was a source of some concern. But that to me is a sea change in things. And it's a sea change in what we conceive of as being within the remit of the National Security Advisor. And then the final point is just the politics, the coarseness of our politics, It affects everything, honestly, in Washington. Foreign policy and national security used to be much more insulated from it. And by used to be, I even mean when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, like not that long ago. I feel the difference between now and then in terms of the intensity and the rawness of the way in which any given political policy decision in the national security space is subjected to the same laws of politics that go for very hot-button domestic issues. And that's something that any national security advisor also is going to have to contend with in a way that, to a considerable extent, wasn't the case before.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. So we've got about 15 minutes for questions, and we've already got some robust lines. So why don't we take two at a time so we can get through as many as we can. Please introduce yourself and ask your question briefly if you can. We'll start here and then there.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Nico, and I'm an MCMP of the class of 2015. You talked about H100 and H800. Can you share with us your timelines towards artificial general intelligence, how you see that, because it's moving fast, and how any evolution of these timelines have impacted the way in which we should look at the dynamics of competition and cooperation with the Chinese to coordinate at the strategic level? The shortening timelines have pushed some to accelerate less coordination and more competition. Where do you stand on that today?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, hi. I'm Ann Thompson, MPP 10, proud graduate. Ask what you can do. All these flags. Love the support of democratic institutions here at the school. So my question is for Dean Chenoweth. Actually, my question is, I'm very surprised to see Jake Sullivan, a major architect of Biden's Gaza policy that, as we know, massacred hundreds of thousands in Palestine. I'm really surprised that he's here, and I want to hear the Kennedy School sort of analysis of its power structure and ethical structure of why we would give a man who's advocated a policy that all of these countries disagree with, the growing number of youth disagree with. This is a dying ideology, which I'm sad to say has lots of power and has killed lots of people, but we are giving a person with this belief this stage at this reunion, and to teach all these kids who know that this is a dying ideology, they actually understand that Palestinians are, dare I say, humans. So I don't really care what he has to say. I know he's got a strong belief, and that's fine, but I think there's millions of people around the world who think differently, and I want to ask the Kennedy School, what is your thought process in giving someone like this a second stage to further legitimize a policy that has killed so many people? Thank you.
So thank you both for the questions. I'm going to let Jake talk to Nico's question shortly. And I'll simply say, I want to thank you for your question and for asking. I don't have a comment on your question right now. I'll just say that we have a very robust process for when we consider which faculty we wish to appoint. We followed that process, and he was appointed by our faculty through that process. Thank you.
And so I know you said you didn't want to hear from me, but I'm pleased to hear from you. And I see that you're filming me right now. I sat on this stage a few weeks ago and reflected some in talking to a student who asked a very good question about how we arrived at the policy we did, the choices the president made. And I also said that this was going to be an opportunity for me to continue to reflect on this, because this is as I said earlier today, a terrible human tragedy, what happened here. What happened on October 7th was a terrible tragedy, and the loss of so much innocent life since then has been a terrible tragedy. And when I was National Security Advisor, I put a huge amount of time into trying to reduce civilian harm and into trying to get humanitarian assistance into Gaza. And I believe that the actions that we took to move humanitarian assistance into Gaza actually help stave off a famine that many people thought was going to come. And since then, if you look at this administration, the complete and utter siege of Gaza, no humanitarian assistance going in, I think you see a big difference in policy from what we were trying to do every day in good faith, struggling with these extremely difficult issues. And I will continue to do that. And I'll continue to look to see, was there something we could have done differently to further reduce civilian harm? And I will think about that every night, because at the end of the day, policy making is about people, human beings. And yes, Palestinians are human beings, and Israelis are human beings, and every person in this world deserves a measure of dignity and self-respect. And I bring that to everything that I do. And I can have a good faith disagreement with the way that you characterized our policy or how you put it, and I do. But I deeply value your right to your perspective, and I think that's part of the ethos of this school. And I'm proud to be here to try to have those conversations with people, including people who deeply disagree with choices President Biden made or that I was part of. And that's going to be part of a learning and a reflection process for me going forward. So that's what I come with here to this school and what I'm going to try to bring every single day to the work that I do. And I hope that I will make the Harvard Kennedy School proud in doing exactly that. The question was timelines for AI and when we may get to general intelligence or something approximating it. Actually, as I was coming here, I listened to two different podcasts. One that confidently predicted we would have AGI by 2030, and the other that said it would probably be around 2054. So we have no idea, really. And yet, your question is totally right, because the policy of chip controls and the policy of competition, the race conditions, are built on the premise that this could come fast. And that could be wrong. On the other hand, if you don't operate on that premise and it does come fast, then you're going to be caught unawares. So this is very much decision-making in a condition of uncertainty. And my view is that we need to do two things at once, which are not easy. One, race at the frontier, try to prevail in the AI competition, and two, have a robust dialogue with China on collectively managing AI risk, especially the risk of misalignment. And in fact, President Biden and President Xi agreed at their summit in San Francisco in 2023 to launch a dialogue, an AI risk dialogue between the US and China. It had one meeting in 2024. It was not that great, to be honest. I think we need to have a much more robust conversation between our two countries, because all of humanity is at stake in this, and the US and China have to work together on it at the same time that we're both trying to build the fastest, most capable systems, and somehow we're going to have to inhabit both of those realities at once.
Please go ahead, and then someone here.
Kyle Herman, MPP 2015. I'm a city councilman in Stowe, Ohio, a purple suburb of Akron. I used to work on democracy programs in Iraq and Lebanon, but now Ohio has a gerrymandered supermajority that has rigged our elections with gerrymandering to shield itself from accountability. So what can the people of Ohio and states like it do to liberate ourselves from corruption and autocracy?
Actually, Erica may be better able to answer that question than I am in a way. We're going to take another one, though.
Okay. Greta Bull, MPP 1990. This is my first reunion back, and thank you for your remarks. Over the course of this weekend, I've heard a lot of talk about China, about Europe, a bit about India, the Middle East. I've heard almost nothing about Africa. And Africa is going to produce 1 out of 2 workers within 5 years in the global economy. It's a major source of rare earth minerals. It's a source of clean energy, if we choose to exploit it. But there's a big power competition going on in Africa, too. At the same time, we've decided to withdraw our diplomatic presence somewhat. We've pulled back USAID, which has left giant budget holes at a time that countries have massive debt overhangs. So I have two questions for you. Why is it that we still speak so little about Africa? And the second one is, what's your view in this changing world of how the United States should approach the continent?
It's a great question. For those of you who haven't gone and looked at these demographic numbers that you laid out, it is remarkable. Immediately, and then you look out to 2050, how much of the working age population in the world will come from Africa. And you're absolutely right. In terms of the time, energy, and investment being spent, it's out of whack with the reality that we now face going forward. One of the things in the Biden administration that we put a lot of effort into was trying to develop an entirely new model of mobilizing investment at scale, not just the annually appropriated programs, but genuinely trying to mobilize $600 billion over 5 years, mostly of private capital, to build out energy, digital, health infrastructure, particularly in Africa. And we had a concept of corridors, and one such corridor involved Angola, DRC, Zambia over to Tanzania, to try to unlock agriculture getting to market, to try to help the kind of critical minerals industry there move into a different phase from where it has been, and it's trying to create digital and clean energy build out. That model actually worked quite well for that purpose, and we've seen real progress on it. That needs to be replicated at scale across the continent, because I think once that backbone is set in place, the ability then to power long-term, really explosive economic growth and technological growth in Africa can be transformative. And I think one of the things that the Congress and the executive need to spend more time on is actually allocating the resources to make that happen. It's not that much money, actually, and the payoff is absolutely massive. So to me, that's got to be the centerpiece of our strategy going forward, moving from a concept of traditional aid to a concept of investment that really unlocks potential. And the model is there, I believe, if we put the resources and the high-level bandwidth and energy to making that happen. With respect to dealing with things here at home, look, I feel the same acute sense of risk about our democracy and our democratic institutions. And I think I don't actually have any monopoly of wisdom, and there are many people in this room who could speak to this better than I can, what to do about it. But just one thing I would note is that everyone at some point has an opportunity to contribute their piece to the sustainment and the resilience of our democratic institutions. And I'm very proud of what Harvard has done to do its piece. But individually and in the work that we do and the nonprofits that we're part of, et cetera, all of us can do that. And I think at this moment, really saying we are going to stand up and ensure that our democracy remains a robust and resilient democracy that we are proud of is something that all of us should commit to. But beyond that, I would really want to listen to other people's advice for what to do rather than give my own.
Last two questions, please.
My name is Ahmed Jalal. I'm MPID 2011. So Professor Clayton Christensen's theory of innovative disruption, which is all about a smaller incumbent defeating smaller player defeating an incumbent, is all about a good enough technology, which is much cheaper, but also much more accessible, can uproot an incumbent. So if you think about China and US competition, China has done that in case of DeepSeek, where it's cheaper, much more easily, the computing power is much more easily done, and so China has done that in AI. And recently in the India and Pakistan skirmish, you've seen the Chinese weapons technology, PL-17, has outdone the European technology. And again, it's much cheaper, 1/3 the price of the French or the European. So what you see is China having the ability, both in AI and defense, to outdo US at a cheaper cost. And so do you think that it was a mistake of the Biden administration as well as the Obama administration to allow US so much entanglement across the world that they were not able to focus internally on their own technology, innovation, manufacturing, number one? And given that, do you think it is not a good strategy to focus inwards and to reduce some of the US commitments to build that kind of technology, to build that kind of industrial capability so that it can again compete with China in those areas. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Ladan Fakori. I'm a mid-career from 2015. I was your Director for Development and Diplomacy in 21. And I co-authored the development strategy. I currently am a senior advisor in the Office of Foreign Assistance at State Department, where we coordinate the state USAID budget. I'm one of the 10,000 USAID employees that's been RIFed. So my question to you is, what do you think we did wrong in terms of explaining development as one of the 3Ds of national security for how it helps the middle class, for the average American? And my second question is, they're not just the 10,000 USAID employees that are losing their jobs, there are 50,000 plus more contractors. The ripple effect is over 50,000 for the community in terms of losing jobs. If you were in our shoes, what jobs should we pursue until we rebuild our national security arsenal? Thanks.
Thank you. So, first, I think if you look at a net assessment, US-China on advanced tech, the picture you paint is not quite as dire as what I would paint. I think the US has a very healthy innovation ecosystem that is generating advances at the frontier. And I would just point out on DeepSeek, we talk about it being much cheaper. That's basically algorithmic efficiency along a linear scale, where it came 2 years after GPT-4 and essentially hit the mark at a fraction of the cost. But basically, you're going to see the same thing from U.S. models as well. So I think we have over-cranked the DeepSeek moment to a considerable extent, which is not to say there isn't a really deep competition between the U.S. and China, but I wouldn't quite characterize it the way you did. Where I would completely agree, though, is that the United States has not paid enough attention to its industrial base and strategic sectors to be able to build at scale in areas that really matter for the future of technology. And that includes semiconductor manufacturing, it includes clean energy technology, it includes biotechnology. And in each of these areas, the Biden administration worked very hard to put investments in place to make up for that deficit, which has grown over the course of quite a very long time. Now, one of the frustrations I spoke about earlier today, is our ability to do that fast. It's been too slow, and that is a problem, and we've got to find ways to break through those obstacles. Then the other point that I would make is a big part of the reason that China has made the advances it has in many of these areas is by pouring massive amounts of money into them, not just doing things much more cheaper and more efficiently, but rather having a state-directed industrial strategy that ended up driving down the cost curve, but after a massive upfront state investment to make it happen. And I don't think the US can replicate that model, nor should we, but targeted investments in critical areas to go along with the kind of natural innovation ecosystem that has powered US technology forward and continues to this day in critical areas, that we should continue to focus on. And I believe we are continuing to focus on it. So I don't think it's ever been a good bet to bet against the United States when it comes to technological innovation. I wouldn't bet against us today. On USAID, first, thank you for your service. Not enough people, I think, say to development people, thank you for your service. I think a lot about, how have we not made the case effectively enough? And I have two reactions to it. One is that I think we need to do a better job of describing to people just what a good value proposition is from the point of view, it's such a modest amount of money in our budget, less than 1%, and yet providing these outsized returns. A lot of people think it's 10 or even 25%. So to me, the most fundamental thing we could do is really center people in understanding the return on investment here from a very small amount being put into what we're getting out of it. So that's one thing. On the other hand, I am not entirely convinced that the American people are opposed, are like cheering the shutdown of USAID programs and so forth. I think this was a move that was made in a kind of shock and awe way. And if you ask people, should we be preventing disease overseas so that, it doesn't spread here? Should we be trying to reduce poverty and reduce instability so that we face less conflict? And, should we help people have a home where they are so huge numbers of them don't feel compelled to migrate because they have no other choice? I think Americans are pretty common sense about this stuff. And so if we can get over the hurdle of there's not really this big trade-off between the investments we need to make your life better here and the money we're putting in over there. If we can get over that basic hurdle, I think we'd be in a much better position. I'm not in a great position to offer career advice necessarily in this moment, but I would just say that because I have the conviction that A, it's totally right that we have this third pillar of national power development, and B, because I actually think that's sort of where the American people actually are, I do not believe that the long-term trajectory is the U.S. is just out of this business and we're not going to have people. So whatever you do, my argument would be, do not give up on the profession or the work or the craft, because I think there will be an opportunity to get back into this core business of the United States, helping provide in health, in education, in climate, in critical areas, support to the rest of the world. And JFK, when he announced the formation of the U.S. Agency for International Development in 1961, he actually, in his speech, it's worth reading, he says, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? It's 15 years after the end of the war, shouldn't we be out of this business? And then he gave a long answer for why it matters to the American people. And that answer is as relevant today as it was in 1961, and I think it will shine through in the end, despite this absolutely destructive set of steps that have been taken in the early weeks of the administration. So my argument would be to believe that there is a future here and choose, make your kind of career choices on that premise rather than on the premise that you've got to pivot entirely into something else, because we need you and we need more people like you doing this work as we go forward.
Jake, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with our alums today. I, for one, am really excited to continue to learn from you for the next 5 years at least. And just want to thank everybody for sticking with us, and wish you all the best and safe travels when you return home.
Thank you. Thank you, Jake and Erica, and thank you all for joining us back on campus to celebrate this special reunion weekend. This has been a meaningful moment in time, a chance to reconnect, reflect, and remember why HKS continues to matter in each of our lives. None of this would be possible without the incredible staff and reunion volunteers. Their efforts behind the scenes made this weekend seamless, joyful, and full of heart. I want to extend my deepest gratitude to each of them and to all of you for showing up with such energy and warmth. We hope you stay engaged with alumni events throughout the year and that you continue to see the Alumni Relations Office as your partner in staying connected to HKS. Travel home safely. Thank you again for spending this time with us. We can't wait to stay in touch and see where your next chapter leads. Thank you.